Good morning. I'm Judge Kim Clark from Allegheny County, and I'm the current chair of the Juvenile Court Judges Commission. On behalf of the Commission, the Pennsylvania Council of Chief Juvenile Probation Officers and their President, Beth Fritz, the Juvenile Court Section of the Pennsylvania Conference of State Trial Judges and their President, Judge Ray Boylan, and the Pennsylvania Commission on Crime and Delinquency and their Chairman, Josh Shapiro, I'm very honored to welcome you to the 2015 James E. Anderson Pennsylvania Conference on Juvenile Justice. We're very pleased that the Pennsylvania Commission on Crime and Delinquency has joined us as a sponsor of this conference again this year, and we are very grateful to PCCD for the funding they are providing to offset a portion of the conference costs. I would also like to take this opportunity to thank Dr. Kim Garish, Chair of the Communication. So we'll try that again. I would also like to take this opportunity to thank Dr. Kim Garish, Chair of the Communication Journalism Department at Shippensburg University, who facilitated the taping of both our morning and afternoon plenary sessions this year. The JCJC continues to broaden our relationship with Shippensburg under the leadership of Bob Tomasini by taking advantage of the many opportunities afforded by the university beyond the confines of our Information Technology Division and our training and graduate education programs. At the Center for Juvenile Justice Training Center and Research. All plenary sessions and workshop materials that have been provided are available for download at www.jcjc.pa.gov. And for this reason, we have not made handouts of the plenary session or workshops presentations available in hard copies to you. So you can print them, you can look at them, and we won't kill as many trees. We've also developed an app that is free to download to your mobile device that will allow you to keep up with all conference activities as they happen, view real-time information pertaining to the conference, and receive reminders of activities prior to their start. On the back page of your conference agenda, and on posters throughout the hotel, you will find a barcode that will allow you to download or view the app. You will also find a link to a website that will allow you to view the web version of the application. With its combination of quality training, awards programs, and the opportunity to exchange information and ideas about the critical issues facing our system, this annual gathering is truly unique and is a reflection of the progressive nature of Pennsylvania's juvenile justice system. Your presence here today is clear evidence of your commitment to the critically important work that we do, and it is indeed a privilege to welcome you and to thank you for attending the 2015 James E. Anderson Pennsylvania Conference on Juvenile Justice. 20 years ago, in 1995, newly elected Governor Tom Ridge called Pennsylvania's General Assembly into a special session on crime. By the end of the special session, 37 separate bills were signed into law, 15 of which affected the juvenile justice system in some fashion. Collectively, these laws represent the most dramatic changes in the history of Pennsylvania's juvenile justice system. Arguably, the most significant of these new laws was Act 33 of Special Session Number 1 of 1995, which included the redefinition of the very mission of our juvenile justice system to require balanced attention to the protection of the community, the imposition of accountability for offenses committed, and the development of competencies to enable children to become responsible and productive members of the community, which better became known as balanced and restorative justice, and of course, which we fondly call BARJ. This afternoon, our plenary session will feature many of the individuals who played significant roles in negotiating the language that was ultimately contained in Act 33, as well as others who were involved in early efforts to implement balanced and restorative justice in Pennsylvania and who continue to do so today. After Act 33 was signed into law, we called upon the most knowledgeable experts in the country to assist us with implementing our new mission, including individuals such as Dennis Maloney, Gordon Bazemore, and this morning's keynote speaker, Mark Carey. As we now commemorate 20 years of balanced and restorative justice, We can point to several milestones that have clarified our mission and focused our efforts. In 1996, the JCJC held 6 regional training programs throughout the state for county implementation teams that included judges, district attorneys, defenders, probation officers, service providers, and others. Every county in the state participated in one of these training programs. 3 white papers were subsequently created that defined and spoke about each of our 3 balanced and restorative justice goals and served as guideposts to help orient and direct the system. Act 86 of 2000 was signed into law by Governor Ridge to create a Bill of Rights for victims of juvenile crime, and later several important initiatives such as the MacArthur Foundation's Models for Change helped us move forward in achieving our balanced and restorative justice mission. After years of steady progress, Pennsylvania's juvenile justice system was uniquely positioned to embrace evidence-based practices, especially after witnessing the successful impact of evidence-based programs within the field of prevention science. In 2010, we once again called upon Mark Carey, who was already blazing a trail across the country regarding the implementation of evidence-based practices, to help us develop a juvenile justice system enhancement strategy designed to enhance the capacity of our juvenile justice system to achieve its balanced and restorative justice mission by employing evidence-based practices with fidelity at every stage of the juvenile justice process, by collecting and analyzing the data necessary to measure the results of these efforts, and with this knowledge, striving to continuously improve the quality of our decisions, services, and programs. Since that time, juvenile probation departments, small and large, rural and urban, as well as service providers and other key system stakeholders, have been retooling their operations to improve outcomes under the rubric of the JJSES. There is no doubt that the JJSES has produced a seismic shift in how we conduct business in Pennsylvania. Our sights remain firmly fixed on our goals of balanced and restorative justice, but our path forward has been forever altered by our juvenile justice system enhancement strategy. The JJSES leadership team and Mark Carey developed the monograph that each of you received at registration. This is it for those, so you make sure you read it. That each of you received at registration in preparation for this conference to highlight the interrelationship between the JJSES and our balanced and restorative justice mission. The JJSES is a means to an end, a means to achieving our statutory mission of balanced and restorative justice. We have done good work, but we need to challenge ourselves to do more. This morning's plenary session, Bolstering Balanced and Restorative Justice, Celebrating Our History, Continuing Our Growth, is reflective of that sentiment. Please join me in welcoming this morning's keynote speaker, our friend, colleague, and guide, Mark Carey.
Good morning. Thank you, Judge Clark. That was an excellent summary. In fact, I don't think I have to say anything now. That was right on target. I am truly humbled to be here today with you. I say that because I think you've done some extraordinary things in this state. And I speak with you about you with pride as I travel across the country, and people ask me, you know, who's doing significant reform, who's making big progress in juvenile justice, and the first word that comes to my mind is Pennsylvania. And it's because of so many of you in the room that have spent countless hours making this change happen. And so when Rick called and said, how would you like to do this opening session, I said, I don't think so, Rick. They're tired of me. I've been here so often. I think I've worn out my welcome. And he said, no, I actually think it would be good for you to do this because you were here during the restorative justice days, and you came back during the evidence-based practices stage, and you're kind of the right person to talk about this on our 20-year anniversary. And so I accepted. And as I was preparing for today, I got very choked up about the work that has been done, the people that I have met, the friendships I have formed. It kind of feels like my home away from home. So I want to thank you for this opportunity to speak to you about your 20-year anniversary. So with that, here's, uh-oh. Of course, there's always going to be technical problems. Okay, hold on one second. Great, thank you. So here's what I want to do today. I want to talk about three objectives, if you will. I want to focus on 20 years. I want to talk a little bit about the past. Whoops. And I want to, if you will, pause for a moment to celebrate how far you've come. So we want to talk a little bit about what those accomplishments look like. Then I want to talk about the present, and I want to talk specifically about how JJSES has enhanced the barge mission. There's no question you're still focused on barge, but JJSES has resulted in a lot of attention in this particular area, and so we want to talk a bit about how JJSES is advancing barge, and then we want to take a glimpse into the future. Why this is not going in order. All right, we'll just start here. If lessons of history teach us anything, it is that nobody learns the lessons. Don't you find that to be true? So often, how many times have you watched news accounts and you will go, excuse me, haven't we already learned this lesson? Why do we keep repeating this all over again? And while I tend to agree with that particular quote, I do take issue with the word nobody, because it seems to me that you're an example of why the word nobody is not true. It seems to me that Pennsylvania has in fact learned from the past. In fact, if you take a look at the history of restorative justice, you will notice that it has its roots in history. I mean, you can take this all the way back to the Old Testament. You could take it back to Native American tradition, Aborigine culture. There are so many examples of how our past has, in fact, shaped who we are today. And you, in fact, did not squander the gift of the past. In fact, you have embraced it and learned from it. So since this is the 20-year anniversary of barge, I thought it might be good to kind of take a glimpse back at 1995. Do you all remember where you were in 1995? Do you remember what color your hair was? Remember, this was 20 or 30 pounds ago, right? So I had a lot of fun with this. I thought I'm going to just take a trip down Google Lane and see what was happening in 1995. So let's take a peek. 1995 was the year of the Oklahoma City bombing. I had the distinct, sobering, and not really pleasure, but experience of visiting Oklahoma City after the bombing, and I don't know how many have seen that site, but the memorial there is absolutely stunning, and it causes you to really reflect on the impact of terrorism and how it's affected every one of us today. But that was a big event, 1995, as you know. It was the year of the O.J. Simpson verdict, the first one, not the second one. And as you know, that had a big ripple effect across the country. Desert Storm officially ended, the year of shock and awe. So that was also memory that I can recall very distinctly. I know where I was sitting, why I watched these clips of Desert Storm. Time magazine also came out with the Man of the Year. Do you know who that was? Do you remember? Newt Gingrich. And he was given Man of the Year award because he ended Democratic control of the House that had been very long-standing. Now, if we zoom ahead a few years, it didn't end so well with Newt. It was fairly short-lived, but nonetheless, it was a big event, 1995. I bought my first house around that particular time, and interest rates were a little high. Now, at that time, the federal interest rate, just the rates that they charge at the bank, was 6%. Today, it's practically zero. I remember the first house the second house I bought was around this particular time. My first house, it was actually, my interest rate was 13%. Nowadays, if you were to get a 13% interest rate on your house, you would, I don't know, have to pick up a third job. And for those of you who've been investing in the stock market, the Dow Jones average was at 4,000. Yeah, it's a lost opportunity now, right? It's now up around 18,000. And then, sadly, for me, eBay was launched. I admit I was an eBay addict for a while. I collect two things: red wine, which I consume at great volume, and number two, I collect baseball cards and memorabilia, and you can get a lot of stuff off eBay. In fact, I was shocked at the things that I could buy. I know this is going to sound really wacky, but there was an auction to purchase the toenails of Mickey Mantle. I did not put a bid in on that one. But when he was sick, they clipped his toenails and saved him and then sold him on eBay. What a world we live in. 1995 also saw this. Tiger Woods won the U.S. Amateur Golf Tournament. Speculation was that he was going to be a super athlete. You could take a look at that broad smile. That was 1995. You don't see that very often anymore. 1995 was also the year that Superman, Christopher Reeves, was paralyzed as a result of an accident with a horse, thrown from the horse. Do you remember the top movies of 1995? Toy Story. My kids were young enough that we watched that over and over and over again. Nowadays, what is it? What's that kid movie? Frozen, that's it. Right. How can I not? I live right outside of Orlando now. How can I not know that? Frozen's everywhere. Other top movies were Braveheart and Apollo 13. And 1995 was the first Victoria's Secret fashion show. Now, I didn't know this. I just happened to find it. I understand it's a little more edgy today, but there you go. And then for you music buffs, Grateful Dead broke up after Jerry Garcia died. That was big news. We are the way we are today because of the events of the past. Pennsylvania juvenile justice, and I mean this with all sincerity, is a national model because of the learnings of your past and the exertion of your leadership. And one of the things I love about Pennsylvania leadership is you are never content. You're never happy with status quo. You're constantly pushing the envelope. But unlike many other states, you've learned from the past. You tend to not repeat the mistakes of the past, which makes working here so much more rewarding. I had two career and life-changing events as it relates to the work that I am involved in. The first one occurred 20 years ago, slightly more than 20 years ago, when I met Denny Maloney and Gordon Bazemore. The first time I heard Denny, like so many in this room, my passions were stirred. I said, who could not agree with this? Who could not agree with the concept that victims are our primary customer, not a second thought? Who could not agree with the fact that when crime occurs, an obligation to restore that crime occurs? Who could not disagree with the concept that we should embark on efforts to allow offenders to earn their redemption, that the community should embrace folks who have made mistakes? It all made so much sense to me. These are the things that I learned, that crime is a wound and justice should be about healing. I love that phrase. It tears apart the fabric of our communities. And if we're truly wanting to be helpful in terms of responding, then we ought to find ways to repair that fabric, which means that we can't do it alone. I learned that there's no such thing as a victimless crime. I sat in circles in neighborhoods where drug dealing was going on, and they talked about how the drug dealing was impacting their neighborhood, how fearful they were. All affected parties should have the opportunity to be part of the response. This idea that we're an expert system, that we're the experts and we'll tell you what you should do, is not part of a restorative justice response. In fact, we know that we can't address crime without engaging in significant partnerships with people who have a vested interest in the outcome. This was life-changing. This was career-changing. This made so much sense. The second life and career-changing event was when I heard Dr. Don Andrews. I distinctly remember where I was. I was in Chicago. I remember what hotel I was in, the Drake Hotel. I remember what chair I was sitting in, third chair on this side on the aisle. And I heard Don Andrews talk about what the science says, and my jaw dropped. I said, well, I don't know how, I don't know when, I don't know how this is going to play out, but I know that this is going to change the way we do justice in this country. And he didn't have all the answers yet, but he knew enough about the science that created quite a shift in our operations over the years. Here's what I learned. I learned that risk matters, that we have to pay attention to the risk level of the individual. I learned that there are certain dynamic risk factors that we have to pay attention to. And some of those risk factors did not make sense to me. I thought, that's not right. Some of the risk factors I thought were more significant were not significant. And at first I didn't believe some of the things that he had to say. But the more I observed and the more I studied, the more I realized that he was actually quite profound in his words. And he had the science to back it up. And Mom, yes, I learned that you were right all along, that who you hang with matters. This was a significant event for me and for many jurisdictions across the country. A 30% reduction in recidivism is a big deal. We're talking about millions of fewer victims if we can achieve this. It would have a ripple effect right through our communities. So, as Judge Clark indicated, there were 3 significant events that occurred in Pennsylvania around this particular time that has helped shape who you are today, that has shaped your conversations and your policies and your practices. All 3 of these are significant. The first one is Act 33. And I don't know how many of you remember this, but there was a surge in juvenile violence back in the 1990s. It was a scary time, or so we thought. There were calls for making the juvenile justice system more like the adult system, and I remember hearing that and going, have you seen the adult system? Why would you want to make it like the adult system? There were calls for referring kids to adult court, reducing the age of maturity. Do an adult crime, do an adult sentence. The word predator was used repeatedly. Created images, emotion, fear. Media splashed sensational stories that incited fear. Do you remember that? It was a scary time in terms of how far we would go to shape our policies to address that fear. It was a time in which jurisdictions could lose their way if they're not careful. But Pennsylvania learns from the past. Pennsylvania was not one of those states that went way over to the other extreme. There clearly were deficiencies in the public protection provisions of the Juvenile Act, and Jim Anderson says, we knew that things had to change, right? Yes, we knew that we had to change, but that doesn't mean going all the way to one extreme. So, Act 33 was born. Barge was born. It was a word I'll describe as balance. In a day when few were talking about balance, in a day when people were talking extremes, Pennsylvania was talking balance. It's such a big deal. Do you realize how significant that is? And so in Act 33, you put an emphasis, in part, on victims. Front and center. I love this comment about it gives us a moral perspective. How could you not embrace victims as a key component of our responsibility? It was so obvious. And yet, how many of us miss this for so long? I talked to many, many probation officers who would say things like, I don't know, victims are a pain to work with. They call and they demand things from us, and my responsibility is to work with the offender, and this is a distraction. It's kind of appalling to hear those things today. But that was fairly common. The restorative era still cares about juvenile justice, but it reframes it by looking at the harm and the obligations to repair to make it right. And I love that quote. We are about to end the punitive era of juvenile justice and begin or enter the restorative era. So you've done a number of things. I want to thank Russ Carlino for these and Susan Blackburn for these slides. Sorry I stole it from you. About community engagement. And I thought it was pretty cool. All across the state, you were doing community engagement. You know, Nils Christie was one of my favorite authors when I was reading about restorative justice, and he talks about social fuel, and I love that phrase, social fuel. Where there is social fuel, you can make change happen. Social fuel exists when individuals, it's going on its own. Individuals are motivated to come together. They have something that they want to advance. And sometimes social fuel comes when there's a crisis. Sometimes it happens when a group of people get together and say, we can do better. Denny talked about earned redemption. That when you commit a crime and you harm your community, you can earn your way back into the good graces of the community. Isn't that what being a community is all about? Don't we do that with our kids? When our kids misbehave, don't we give them an opportunity to earn back into the good graces? Paul Tough once wrote a book called How Children Succeed. It became one of my favorite books. I can't stop this thing from moving. Sorry about that. It's got a mind of its own. He talks about 25 traits. Kids who have one of these 25 traits are more likely to be responsible, law-abiding, successful individuals. And one of them that they talk about is this idea of creativity. We need to find a way to be creative. We need to find a way to innovate and to stretch our abilities. And so there are so many opportunities to do that with young people. Our soul is stirred when we experience creativity, whether that's a song, a poetry, or art. When we show gratitude for what our youth do, we pull them into the pro-social world. Is that not true? When someone actually does something that the community values and we applaud and we appreciate them, that makes them want to be more a part of the very community. When we give of ourselves, we become more invested to those in whom we give and to the cause that it represents. There are many counselors who work with individuals who are struggling who will say, the first thing I want you to do is I want you to go start giving to someone else. I want you to think less about yourself, and I want you to start giving, and I want to see how you feel. When we recognize our youth and we demonstrate that they have value, especially by our most cherished institutions, then they're more likely to be motivated and want to be part of the community. This is one of the reasons why I do believe that drug courts have a significant potential impact, because we have a judge sitting on the bench being a role model, one of our most cherished institutions, showing interest in the individuals that have landed in the justice system. When youth contribute to a noble cause, it makes them feel rewarded and only encourages more of the same. So something magical happens when volunteers come together, not with selfish interests, but with a desire to make things better, because energy begets energy. This is very sensitive. Sorry, Dolphin, doesn't want to look at you there, sorry. When we can help those who are less fortunate, maybe, just maybe, we're not so self-absorbed. In fact, we can find gratitude. Gratitude is another one of the 25 traits that Paul Tough talks about, that when we have gratitude, we're more likely to appreciate what we have. We can teach youth and be reminded ourselves that we are not an island, that we have the opportunity to give and experience joy in that process. And this joy keeps giving and coming back. I love that quote. After I finished my required work service time, I just kept coming back because I felt connected to what I was doing. These and other programs that you have put in place have created opportunities to engage the youth into the very communities in which they live. The second major initiative that happened around this time, the major event or initiative, was the fact that you were the first state chosen among 4 for the MacArthur Foundation's Model for Change. And I don't need to tell you the impact that had, the focus on mental health, the focus on aftercare, and the focus on disproportionate minority contact. It resulted in a flurry of activity and many system improvements. After that season started to wind down, JJSCS was born. Roughly 7 years after MacArthur's Foundation initiative, the Pennsylvania Council of Juvenile Probation Officers and JCJC got together and tried to answer this question. Now what? What are we going to do to continue our progress? And so they discussed what was the emerging information, science, research that would help guide what they would do next. And out of that came the JJSCS. In many ways, JJSCS purpose statement is very simple. We're going to use research evidence to guide what we do. That seems like a no-brainer. Who don't want that, right? And yet it's remarkable how often we don't know what the research says. There's contradictory research. There's research that's done very poorly. And yet we're all very busy and don't have a chance to necessarily understand and to winnow down the research that matters the most. But that's what evidence-based practices talked about. That's what JJSCS said, is that we better know what that research says. And by the way, we ought to collect data. We ought to know what the data says about our system. We should use practices that we know do in fact work. And by the way, we should stop using practices that do harm. And there are an awful lot of them that do harm. And so JCJC and the Chiefs Association said, let's put our minds together. And as a result of that, we now have JJSCS. And so there's this conversation that has been going on around, have we abandoned Barge? Is JJSCS now the way we're going and Barge is an afterthought? Not at all. In fact, in reality, JJS exists to help the state achieve the Barge mission, simply by using research to guide that practice. So I love this statement. Again, got this from Russ and Susan from a presentation. They said JJSCS adds a shot of adrenaline to balance and restorative justice. I love that phrase. It's kind of got us pumped up, you know? We got a lot of stuff to do, a flurry of activity. It gave us a roadmap on how we can, in fact, reduce rearrests. It increased our knowledge. We know so much more today than we did before JJSCS. In fact, it's been really fun to talk to people. And out of their mouth, they just blurt out criminogenic needs like they were born with that phrase. If someone could observe us from the public, they'd think that we're on some kind of medication. Have you noticed that the individuals who is high risk has had 4 criminogenic needs include antisocial personality? And did you notice that their responsivity factor includes a number of mental health conditions? Blah, blah, blah. I mean, the jargon just is rolling off people's tongue. It's a different world today than even 4 years ago. We become adrenaline junkies, I think. So let's take a look at, if that's the past, let's take a look at how, in fact, JJS is advancing the Barge mission. So I looked up adrenaline. I thought, well, I'm going to take this one step further, and I did my little Google search, and here's what it says. Adrenaline causes the body to gear up for high energy use. It sustains us during emotional excitement. And the bottom line, and this is the part I like, adrenaline brings the body to its full alert status. That's a great description. Pennsylvania, you're alert. There's a lot going on around here, and people are extremely busy conducting the work of Barge. As a result of this adrenaline rush, we got a lot of stuff going on. We got the YLS, we got motivation interviewing, we got case planning, we got dosage. We're looking at SPEP to help with our service provider output. Behavioral response matrix. We're using journals, guides, bits, cognitive behavioral interventions, 4 core competency. It's a lot of stuff, all designed to move us closer to achieving our Barge mission. Some of these things were started before JJSCS, but they got a shot of adrenaline. Now it's happening all over. By the way, there are side effects to adrenaline. Common side effects include shakiness, anxiety, and sweating. And I think that's pretty accurate. There's a lot of hand-wringing going on. This is not easy. In fact, Beth Fritz and I were just talking a little bit about the idea of developing skills in a way that they're routinely and consistently conducted. It doesn't happen overnight. In fact, we chip away slowly and methodically. This is hard work. I have said this over and over again. My life was easier before JJSCS. Doing supervision and intervention was easier before then. Now I got to use my MI techniques. Now I got to find the responsivity. I got to find the driver. I got to do case planning. I got to find skill deficits. I have to actually do role plays. It was easier before. So this effort's been guided by 2 monographs. So not only have you captured your roadmap and your policy in these monographs, but they're actually serving as a template for a national model. I cannot tell you how many people have come up to me in other states who said, I read that monograph in Pennsylvania. Did they really do that? Are they really doing this? And now we have a new monograph, the Barge monograph, that seeks to answer this question: how is JJSE and Barge interconnected? What is the link? How is, in fact, JJSES advancing Barge? And we wanted to dispel this notion that JJSES has in any way replaced the juvenile justice focus on Act 33. I want to call your attention to the names on that slide, because that writing team did a phenomenal job. What do you think of the monograph, by the way? Have you read it yet? Just got it, of course. I would urge you to read it. They did a phenomenal job of capturing your history and answering this question: how is JJSES advancing Barge? It also talks about what we have left to do in a small way. It reaffirms this idea that your juvenile justice mission continues to focus on these 3 areas: community protection, victim restoration, and youth redemption. Nothing has changed in that regard. They are still the objectives. It's still a balanced approach. But let's take a look at these one at a time. Community protection. We all in this room want safe and secure neighborhoods. For most of us, that's why we got in this business. We get safe and secure neighborhoods by engaging in meaningful relationships where people take compassion on each other. They engage in a commitment to this idea that we're all part of the same village and that we need each other, that we're not an island. Barge tries to do this by identifying, managing, and minimizing risk, and to partner with the community. And it resulted in a significant number of changes. So I thought you might appreciate an example of community protection that has come up recently. Some of you may remember Dee Bell. Dee is a national consultant. She worked in the Georgia juvenile justice system. She's a restorative justice consultant and a longtime supporter of Pennsylvania's Barge initiative. She lives in Charleston, South Carolina. We all know what happened on June 17th. 9 people were killed in a church as a result of someone who had hatred toward a group of individuals that didn't look like him. So here's what I learned from Dee. For years in Charleston, she and others have been training folks to do circles. They have built an infrastructure where they have a restorative culture in Charleston. They have trained circle keepers. And when this event happened, the mayor of Charleston called Dee up and said, "We need help." And he called Dee and Judge Byers in to say, "We have to develop a strategy so that we keep the peace. We can't have another Ferguson." And so she and Judge Byers came in and they started to set up circles. The beauty is they had the infrastructure and the circles began their work. Their goal was to create a permanent strategy to resolve racial inequality. They held circles at the church. And here's the thing that blew my mind. Today, there are 137 circles working to address this goal. Active 137 circles. They even had gang members approaching them and said, how can we get involved? Can we participate in the circles? This is what I mean by social fuel. When a tragedy happens, social fuel kicks in. And it can be used for the purpose of unity. This is a classic example of how restorative justice can bring about community well-being. How could we ever do this work without the community? Now, JJSES has enhanced community protection, gave it, if you will, an adrenaline shot by looking at the research and saying, what tools are there out there? What does the research say about community protection? And as a result of that, additional emphasis on actuarial tools, emphasis on swift and certain responses when violations occur, partnering with community providers, because we can't do this without them. We want to make sure that we're all pulling in the same direction, and guarding against system penetration, because when a juvenile gets sucked into the system, it can often be difficult to get out. And we want to make sure that we use our secure facilities only for those who truly need a locked facility. So it expanded the toolkit, if you will. You have the LSCMI, you have the Padre, you have service matrices, et cetera, et cetera. JJSES has helped advance the BARGE mission by bringing these tools and practices that are consistent with the research. The second aspect of the BARGE mission is victim restoration. This was sorely needed when restorative justice came on the scene. As we all know, it resulted in an explosion of new services across the country and re-energizing old concepts that have fallen by the wayside. My parents practiced restorative justice. They didn't know that word at the time when I shoplifted as a kid, because they marched me into the shopkeeper's shop. And I had to sit there and tell them what I did, and I had to hear from the shopkeeper about how I have harmed the community. It's an old concept. We've fallen away from that over the years. But BARGE has advanced this and supported it and prompted it with providing these kinds of service enhancements. You know, people still talk about the Tylenol story. You remember that, the tampered Tylenol? People got sick and died as a result of that. And they still talk about Tylenol's response, that they pulled all the product off the shelf. And they touted it as some huge event, that this is what we mean by corporate responsibility. And yes, it was, and we should applaud this. But why is that a story? Why is that unusual? Why shouldn't that be the way it normally works? That people take responsibility, that they learn how to say, I'm sorry, when they make a mistake. They're the model. If we're going to teach our youth to be responsible, we as adults also have to show that same responsibility. So JJSES also has attempted to advance the goal of victim restoration by inserting, for example, victim restoration in their case plans to make sure that that remains a focus point for probation officers, case managers, and using surveys to find out what people's experiences are. But I have to be honest with you, JJSES has got a long way to go when it comes to victim restoration, and there's a couple reasons why. Number one, the vast majority of research is about offenders. We know a lot about how to treat youth to help shape their behavior. There are a lot of tools that are available to help shape behavior. But when it comes to research on victims and restoration, or I should say victim restoration, there's very little. So we have got some work to do. And this is an area, and I'm going to talk about in a moment, and next steps. We have some work to do to either find that research or to create that research so that we can begin to learn what actually works best when it comes to restoration. Third, final area is the youth redemption area. All too often, involvement in the court system results in people reporting that they basically are jumping through hoops to satisfy their conditions. That at the end of their time, and you ask them, what have you learned? And they say, well, I've learned that I got to do what the court tells me to do or I'll get in trouble. That's not good enough. And so one of the things that Barge talks about is that an individual should leave the system more capable than when they entered. That they should acquire skills that make them more likely to be successful. So we want to build skills that matter in the real world, where they can say that their encounter with the justice system was a good experience. So Barge has emphasized strengths, working with people's strengths instead of deficits, workforce development, independent living, and thinking skills, among others. JJSES attempted to take this to the next level by focusing on dynamic risk factors, those 8 criminogenic needs, because we know that if we can help them address those dynamic risk factors, they're more likely going to stay out of trouble. They're more likely going to be successful. And we have to learn how to teach these skills in a way that they can actually use them in real life. And so as a result of JJSES, we have tools and worksheets and specific techniques to help kids learn those skills. So in the end, this is the big picture, right? JJSES exists to advance the mission of Barge. It is what we are all about. It's noble work. It's work that the community appreciates. It's work that keeps people out of the system and successful. So if that's what JJSES has contributed to Barge, let's take a quick glimpse at the future. The other day I had the opportunity to meet with the leadership team. The leadership team is creating a 3-year action plan, trying to answer the question, where do we go next? And as part of the exercise, we asked this question: what has JJSES done for Pennsylvania? What have been the outcomes? And this is what folks came up with. I'll just highlight a few things. They said things like, our language has changed. It's a very different conversation today. We are more focused on the things that we know matter. We're more energized. We have a roadmap. We know what we need to do. We have greater skills today than we did 4 years ago. If you think about how much training has gone on in the state to advance the skills, it's pretty phenomenal. We are now focusing on quality assurance. Thank God for that. Because training is not enough. You got to have continuous quality improvement. We're focusing on data to find out whether we're in fact having an impact. We're seeing more innovation come out. And one of the things I think you should feel proud of is that you are creating for yourselves a reputation that is rippling across the country. You are on the map. You were already on the map, but now you're even more on the map. But we also know that you don't like to rest on your laurels and that more needs to be done. And so this is tentatively what the group has come up with. Again, this is not, this is just a draft. But the idea is that we need to start working on some of these other things. We're still struggling with implementation success. This is not unique to Pennsylvania. It's one thing to know what to do. It's another thing to do it consistently. The devil's in the details. Observing what happens in courtrooms and probation offices and service provider services, etc. We need to make sure that it's being done in alignment with the science, and it's not easy. We have habits to overcome. It's the #1 issue across the entire country. There's a desire to focus more on quality assurance. This is an infrastructure issue. The need to create coaches and learning teams. And perhaps most importantly, JJSES needs to examine the research on accountability, those practices that relate to victim restoration. Where research does not exist, we need to spur forth those efforts to create that. We have a lot of work to do. In addition, we're looking for input, so you will be, some of you will probably be notified of this. We'll probably be asking for some feedback, but we're looking to find out from you what else should we focus on in the next 3 years. We have our roadmap, but we need to know where the needs are. So please, if you are interested in giving us input, we're looking for your thoughts. So, there's a quote from the monograph I want to read. There is no doubt that JJS has produced a seismic shift in how we conduct business in Pennsylvania. Our sights remain firmly fixed on the barge goals, but our path forward has been forever altered by the JJSES. Change is never easy. But the extraordinary level of commitment among Pennsylvania's juvenile justice practitioners has produced impressive results in just a few years, and I cannot agree anymore. So Russ sent some of us a quote from a Pennsylvania judge. I want you to guess what year this quote was produced. We who work in the field of personalized justice have many responsibilities to the past and to the future. Our juvenile courts are far from perfect. They are changing as experience accumulates. New discoveries and techniques in diagnosis, prediction, and treatment will modify our practices. It is the right of the public to demand that we will be willing to learn, that we constantly improve ourselves to the end that every child should gain by it. In the field of interpretation, we should approach the public with pride for the past, with strength for the present, and with hope for the future. It was like he wrote that quote for us today, didn't he? And what year was that? Judge Clark, you know, you got this memorized, right? 1949. What he said back in 1949 is true the same today, is it not? We're constantly learning. New discoveries. We have to keep improving ourselves. So I have a kind of a closing here I want to provide that celebrates the work that you've done. But before I show you some photos of some people in this room, I want to share a short video clip of why Pennsylvania has exhibited, or I should say, a clip on the fact that leadership is what helps change our existing status quo. And so this clip is about 3 minutes, and then I want to close with a few photos.